A test, a test, a test.
Can you guys hear me? I can't hear you.
Bobby, can you hear us?
Okay, so you can hear me, but I can't hear you. So
Can you hear me now, Mr. Bobby? You're not hearing us? Oh, I know why. How about now?
oh yeah, I hear you.
You hear me now?
Yeah,
I think we're
I
good.
hear my
You hear what?
own voice. I hear my own voice reverberating.
You may need to mute your microphone when you're not talking. So you're getting a loop back?
Okay, I can see the MC, which is you talking. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now everything seems good.
You got your
I'm not
laptop
getting
speakers
any
turned
any reverberation. So
reverberation.
will I be able to see the screen that the board is seeing?
Will Bobby be able to see the screen? I mean, are you in good? You're not in GoToMeeting, are you? So you
Yeah.
can't share your screen?
I'm not sharing my screen.
No, I mean Alan. So you want to see the board?
Oh, we have the handy dandy camera adjuster thing. So keep an eye on the screen, Bobby.
What are you doing? Mr. Barry is on it.
Mr. Fry, can you see the screen now?
No, I can hear you clearly.
This conference will now be recorded.
So he's not seeing any of this.
But that's okay. I can maybe follow I've got my documents up on my computer. Should I click on active cameras?
Yeah, it's on play.
Hey, Bobby.
You there, Stephanie?
I am. You.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Working and listening at the same time.
Oh, there's the screen.
How about now, Bobby?
Yeah. I see it. It's
Oh, wait, Alan, can we still zoom in on that? We got it up there now if you could zoom.
What's that now? Can you hear him, Bobby?
pardon me.
Can you hear them?
I cannot hear anybody but you.
I can't hear anybody but you.
All right, the Board of Supervisors meeting will come to order. Welcome, everyone. Mr. Jackson called me a little while ago, said he's running late. Still herding some cattle or something, I guess. I don't know. But so he's told me it was my turn in the barrel till he gets here. He'll be here in about 20 minutes, I think. So would you all please join us with a Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you very much. Let the record show that we do have a quorum. We need to adopt an agenda. I've got a couple of things here. Under 4A, under the consent agenda, we need to add supplemental appropriation for the schools for 103,474.45. And as I recall, Mr. Weekly, that is the school, that is the bus for the
It's a
special
bus
ed.
for the schools, so those are funds they've received, not county funds.
Right.
We would just do a supplemental since it's down at the
Correct.
treasurers to put into
Came
the
into-
budget.
Comes into the treasurer's office and we got to appropriate over to
Yes,
the
sir.
schools. So that was 4A. And under new business, 5A, we've got Madison County Volunteer Fire Department additional funds consideration. Brian Gordon is here tonight to
That is correct. And just
to
for
talk
further
about that.
clarification, they're going to talk about extrication tools and so forth, but Mr.
Right.
Gordon will be presenting.
And 7A will be a letter of support for Skyline Cap, who is applying for a grant to buy the old Barber's house up at the south end of town. So, are there anything else, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to add to the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
Very well. We have a motion to approve the agenda as amended and a second. Any further discussion? Very well. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, so the next item on the agenda is public comment. And so for those of you that wish to make some public comment, I would appreciate it if you would get a mic. We are streaming this, and those they're sitting at home trying to understand us need to be able to hear, because if you were at home, you'd want to hear it. So please raise your hand. Bruce will hand you a mic.
Last week, I was driving out of town on Main Street.
Name for the record.
Nick McDowell. I live on Hoover Road. Driving east on the Main Street out of town, as I approached where the EMS people are, I saw an ambulance and a medic pull up and stop, lights on, siren on, and then they continued. And I noticed that there's no sight distance for them as they pull out of their area looking to the left, because that's obstructed by that sort of a mound or a hill where there's those other businesses up there. I complained about this last year, and I think VDOT put a sign up just past the post office that says Rescue Squad, which is not only a misnomer now, it's basically worthless. And my concern is this. When I was much younger, I worked with the fire department and we responded to these kind of things. My experience was that oftentimes somebody would have a critical incident like a heart attack or respiratory arrest or something like that. And then a relative there would sort of flap their hands and run around trying to figure out what to do, call their mother, and 5 minutes later call the fire department, and you're already losing. And if these people have to stop, in the case of a critical emergency, the time that they lose is critical. So I strongly recommend the Board of Supervisors consider putting up a signal light for the EMS people. Thank you very much.
All right.
Appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Mr. McDowell. Who else?
May I? I'm Joe May. I kind of live near Atlanta. Is that loud enough, Cardi?
Yes, sir. I think so. What do you think? Is Bruce, is that all right?
All right.
Thanks.
Was that you, Cardi, that authorized the renaming of Pass Run to Ass Run?
Did I authorize it? No, the board voted on it. Did
No,
I
but
make
now
the
it's
motion?
Ass Run.
Huh?
Somebody spray painted the P. It's Ass Run.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I guess we got to check with VDOT.
I guess
huh?
you ought to change the name to something more complicated. The
Well,
other thing is that district manager, whatever, from Charlottesville ever going to show up here? Because my road, Whippoorwill, is a living hell. And I thought 2 to 3 years ago, they were going to start paving. And remember, Ms. Hoffman, I said, I hope they start at my end. I'm just wondering.
All right. Let's make some contact with,
I'll definitely follow up with
See if she
VDOT.
can-
I'll check and see what the 6-year road plan is.
Yeah.
The board in the past has asked VDOT to come quarterly. If you would like that frequency to improve, we can make that request. They used to come monthly years ago, but so just
Okay.
let me know what you want, but I'll definitely follow up with Mr. May about Whippoorwill.
all right. Yeah, it is on a 6-year plan, as I recall.
Yeah, I think
But
it was, yeah.
it's not at the top of the list.
Was that 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, 6 years, Joe. You're 3 years in.
I guess halfway there.
We got to keep you alive so you can see it. Who else would like to have public comment?
Thank you. My name is Jim Smith. I live in Brightwood. I'm the chairman of the Madison County Republican Committee, and I'm speaking in that capacity tonight. Regarding the proposal offered by the General Registrar and the Electoral Board, my recommendation is that be rejected in its entirety, that the board be instructed to provide more detailed, complete, and researchable proposals in the future, and that this analysis be used as a template for items that might appear before you during this budget process. Now, a little bit of background. On December 4th, 1792, the General Assembly prepared an act authorizing the existence of Madison County. We were then part of Culpeper. The town of Madison was formed January 6, 1880. But according to Doug Graves, Graves Mill resident known for his love of the history of the area and his extreme knowledge, he said that, you know, that when they overhauled the old mill site from the late 1700s, there was a voting booth in it, had a latch inside the door, small shelf or ledge whereby to fill out paper ballots. Fast forward just a little bit, also in the late 1700s, 1789, February 2nd especially, James Madison was elected to the Congress to defeat James Monroe by 336 votes. Had James Madison not won that race, we would not be a nation. And chances are some of those votes were cast in Graves Mill. The reason that we would not have been a nation, there were two recalcitrant colonies, both anti-federalists, that had refused to sign on. It was well known that Madison had drafted the Bill of Rights, would pass it on to George Mason for further approval. And then Rhode Island and North Carolina decided to join the Union, so we had 13 as opposed to 11 states. That is the significance of that race. I've got details that will be provided to you. You have them now, and I'll send them to you electronically. So imagine that some of those votes actually that created this nation were cast in Graves Mill, but that was then, and this is now. Today, the registrar and the Democrats on the Electoral Board want a new backup voting machine so that they can have some redundancy at the CAP during votes. You have to dig to find out that's what seems to be really wanted here. And I understand redundancy, it's a good thing. I've got a son who's project manager for manned space flight, and I can see why he wants redundancy for oxygen, but there's no need for redundancy for a CD backup to an MP3 player so they can hear the dark side of the moon when they're on the other side. Redundancy is not necessary in this case. Those ballots can be handled quite well. As we've done in the future, we set the record in the Commonwealth for write-in votes, managed to go through each and every ballot, hand tabulating them to ensure that Mr. Freitas was in fact elected. No big deal. We're talking less than 80 people. You're informed in the proposal that you have to have 100 people to form a precinct. That's true, but so what? You don't have to have 100 people to maintain a precinct. It's entirely in the purview of the governing body, you, to determine what precinct we have and where. There is no reason to remove Graves Mill from the list of precincts. She also says that due to new requirements, a requirement is a requirement, not to be established somewhere in the law or in regulation. The new requirements for tabulation of early voting results, the registrar must obtain an additional voting machine. Well, I don't understand why that is or how that is, and we're given no authority for that statement. It might be nice to have it. It's not necessary that we spend $10,000 for a new voting machine. What if we have an EMP and the voting machines go down? Then what? Well, we hand count ballots. That's what they did in Graves Mill in the very first election of this new federation. That's what we can do today if we need to. We don't need another $10,000 machine, and we most assuredly do not need to close Graves Mill. We need to provide exact references for these requirements so that you, the board, can look at them to determine, in your view, whether or not it's correct. There's a strange segue in the proposal regarding whether or not there needs to be a new precinct created for the town of Madison. It does not. That's not what the statute provides. And I think that since heard from the Department of Elections that they do not have to split the statute. But the somewhat confusing proposal suggests that we need to combine 2 precincts to get a voting machine, and then we need to split 2 precincts, and I don't know what happens to the voting machine after that. Neither of those 2 are true. I would again respectfully suggest that you reject the proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Who else? Anybody else for public comment? In this case, tonight's not a public hearing. We have another session for public comment, but I think under this circumstance, it's a little bit unusual. I'm interested, and I would. What I'd like to see is Lauren's going to come up and tell us why this came up, and then I would like to hear from the public based on what Lauren has told us as well. So we kind of act like it's a public hearing, because later on there will be a public hearing on this, right? If you choose to move forward on it, there will be another public hearing. But just like when I was on the Planning Commission, I personally would like to hear everything I can hear right now. So when we get to Lauren's presentation on number 7 on the agenda, we'll hear what she has to say. We'll let the public speak, and then there will be another public comment at the end of the meeting, as always. Mr. Gregg, is that fair? Yes, sir. Everybody, gentlemen and Charlotte,
I'm fine.
is that good with y'all?
Yes, yes.
It was a lot of ordinary, but I think this is worth it.
David Lewis, I live at Graves Mill. I appreciate y'all doing this. I would wait till later, except I have another appointment at 7. I live in Graves Mill, vote in Graves Mill. Just this evening, well, I didn't find out about this until Sunday. I got the email. I used to live at Graves Mill Farm, and when I lived there, we voted at Wolftown, which is about a 2-3 mile trip. And now I live up at Graves Mill, so I go to Graves Mill, but it was actually a shorter drive to get from Graves Mill Farms to Graves Mill than Wolftown. I can't help but wonder if the districting maps couldn't be reworked to better suit everybody. Like looking at the map, the Kriglersville and Graves Mill district include huge amounts of land, but that's all national park. Nobody votes in there, just something I'd like y'all to consider before, we've lost our post office. We're gradually losing our identity as a small town. And I know for a fact a lot of Graysville people would really hate to see this go. And I appreciate you letting me speak now. And y'all have a good evening. I'm sure you'll do what you think is best.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
Good evening. I'm Doug Graves, and I just learned of this like Saturday evening, so yeah, give me, but I have no informative comparison. I would just like to go on record that I am diametrically opposed to removing Grays Mill precinct or consolidating it with another precinct. The community itself, Graves, post office, Graves, Mill, whatever, I have documentation that goes back, it's older than this the county of Madison. And at one time, probably the best part of 250 years, it was a totally independent, self-supporting entity within itself. And I'm just speaking clearly of the historical value. I know Ms. Eames has talked about the economic, perhaps the economics they could save by closing it or consolidating. But I'd like for you to think about, can anyone put a pencil to the historical value of these old institutions that we have in this country? I mean, you can just see the fiasco with the statute. I'm not going there. That's a sore subject also. But I mean, you know, I think years from now, they're going to look back and say, what did these people think of? You know? And I'm just really opposed to changing. Like Dave Lewis said, we lost our post office, and now we're losing our voting precinct. And at one time, we have some of the highest percentages of any other precinct in the county of people that vote. And I think that's a very important sign. It was mentioned in the article about the 88 people, the low voting numbers. Well, I can give you 4 or 5 families now have a total of 13 young juveniles that potentially will vote.
Anyone else? Sure. Oh, yeah, we will have that opportunity. Yes. All right. Okay, with no further comment, public comment, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is a consent agenda. So information for the public and for our new members here. Anything on the consent agenda that you don't feel comfortable with or not, or you would like to discuss, just ask the chair to pull it out. We vote on the rest of the consent agenda, then we go back to the item that we pulled out. So tonight we have minutes from the January 4th, 22 meeting, January 5th, 22 meeting, the 11th, and we have a supplemental appropriation from the sheriff for $38,754. And I think that especially for the 2 new members here, back in October, bonuses were given to the sheriff's deputies, and the bonuses for the constitutional officers were paid out of the sheriff's budget. And the comp board has now reimbursed the county for the bonuses. So the money comes in from the comp board, goes into our goes into our treasury, the county, and this supplemental appropriation simply moves the money back into the sheriff's budget. So that's the explanation on the supplemental budget for the sheriff. So is there anything in those? Oops, I'm sorry, got another item.
Yeah, okay.
And the other supplemental appropriation that we put on the agenda at the beginning of the meeting was the appropriation for the schools, $103,474.45. This was brought up at the school CIP meeting. It was brought up at the school board meeting. The school got some ESSER funds to provide a school bus for special ed, and that is the price of the school bus. And there again, so the ESSER funds have come into our treasurer. We're appropriating it back to the schools. No money out of the county coffers.
Mr. Chair, I have one thing before you all vote. Mr. Jewett brought to my attention, and on the screen it's highlighted. We have since made that correction. That was meeting minutes. Which one were they on? January 5th, your joint meeting with the Planning Commission. That was actually Supervisor Jewett that made the comment and referenced. So that has been corrected, and we'll reflect that in the minutes.
Okay. All right, so does anybody on the board wish to pull anything out of the consent agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the consent agenda as amended.
I'll second.
Very well, we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Oh yeah, aye. I forgot. I vote too. Oy vey. Okay, tonight, special appearances is the next item on the agenda. I don't know that we have any, but if there are any constitutional officers or department heads who have something else they'd like to impart, we would entertain it now. Very well. Then old business, there is none. We go to new business. So number 5, we have the ratification of the January 15th, 22 local emergency declaration. This was done in between board meeting cycles. The declaration ended on the 17th, so it was a 3-day declaration. But nevertheless, the county or the board needs to ratify this declaration amendment. So that's all there is to this one, to ratify this. So I would entertain a motion or discussion on this ratification.
It doesn't have a number, correct? It just has a date.
Correct. It's just a date. If you may recall at your organizational meeting, that's when they start naming winter storms. The winter storm Frida caused all that havoc. You ratified that. So this one, it's got the name of the storm and the date. So that should satisfy, unless Mr. Gregg has any comment.
So we just need a motion to ratify.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the ratification of the 1/15/22 local emergency declaration.
Second.
Very well. We have a motion and a second to ratify the January 15th, 22 local emergency declaration. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Oh yeah, aye. Keep forgetting to vote.
You're good.
You want to
No, go
take a
ahead.
minute? All right, so now we'll go to 5A on the amended agenda. We got a presentation by Brian Gordon for the Madison County Volunteer Fire Department. Mr. Gordon?
Good evening. Alan's going to put a letter up, but basically what I'm here to request is due to recent changes in how we respond to extrication events, car wrecks in Madison County, we don't have a viable backup within the county outside of Rescue Unit 6. When I say viable, we do have Support 7, but it has antiquated tools on it. It's hydraulic. A lot of the things that we have on the rescue engine are not on that vehicle. What we're requesting is $40,000 to uptick that vehicle to close to where the rescue engine is. It won't have all the capability, but we'll have most of it. And basically, we have 29, which has a dramatic traffic level on it. We see it every day. It's increasing. Lord knows what's going up and down 29. The chances of getting two at the same time and the chances of getting a major extrication where we maybe need 2 vehicles or extra tools exists. So that's the bulk of the request, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions for Brian? Mr. Weekly?
Yes. So as you may recall, the board approved an MOU between EMS and the fire company. We're very thankful for that. So as Brian said, there's a need to outfit some more tools for that. So this is a request coming for you tonight. It would be up to the board to determine if you want to look to fund this out of current FY22. If you did so, I would suggest contingency fund, or if the board would so desire to take this up in FY23. Mr. Gordon, is there any time sensitive of this funding request being fulfilled?
From a planning standpoint, we want to make sure we do this right. If we have to wait till July, it's not going to be a huge deal. And if we get it approved right now, it's not going to happen right now. We need to make sure we do this right. We'll collaborate with EMS, see what they would like to see on it, struts, so on and so forth, and emergency management as well.
What kind of time frame will it be to get this equipment in? I mean, with delays across the board.
In a COVID environment, who knows? My gut tells me it won't be that bad because it's specialty equipment, but I don't know that.
So, Mr. Chairman, it's up to the pleasure of the board if you would like to approve tonight, or you can certainly, I'll be talking to Mr. Fry, who will be in the office on Thursday, about some additional funding that will need to come before. So we certainly could take this request and look to come back at our February 8th meeting with a recommendation. Your choice.
What would y'all like to do on this? Wait till February 8th?
As long as he's not, I mean, they're not desperate need.
This is a prepared deal here. It's not something we have. The rescue engine now has all the stuff we're looking at doing here. This is a redundancy, so to speak.
So another strategy behind that is There will be another request coming to you, I believe, related to the sheriff's department. That will probably be a contingency request. As you know, it doesn't matter if it's a penny or whatever. Contingency funds is board approval. So you may be able to take that up. I'm sure you're going to want to ask at that time, where does our balance of contingency and where would this leave us? So that's why I'm suggesting the 8th. That's 2 weeks out. I don't think it'll be that much impact.
Anybody else have questions for Brian or Mr. Weekly? You want to wait until February 8th, we can come back to this and go from there.
Okay.
Get a little more information on some things by then, Brian.
Sure. We'll get a shopping list together, see exactly what we're looking at, and we'll have an idea.
Very good.
Brian, I'll reach out when Bobby gets back. We
Okay.
can narrow it down. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Budget summary, FY22. Michelle?
Mr. Chairman, Michelle will be giving the presentation. We do have Mr. Fry on the line as well.
Yes, sir.
Good evening. Just to go over what's before you and in your packets, where we are currently with revenues right now. Year to date, we're right about 56%. Expenditures are at 46%. Barely over. We're in good shape. I'm sorry. Keep saying it.
One moment, point of order, Mr. Chairman. For those who are online, if you're not speaking, please mute your devices or microphones on those devices. Thank you.
You can see the year-to-date actuals for revenue. We've gotten in a little over $11 million, and then expenditures are in good shape as well. I'm not sure you're not moving through that, so there you go. Everybody else here can't see it either. On over to capital projects. Capital project fund includes all debt finance projects for the county and the schools, as well as non-debt finance projects for the county. And there's not a whole lot going on right now. Everything is paid up. We've had the primary school and the renovations. Everything is taken care of up to date.
Michelle, hold on one sec. Cardi?
Oh, no, Michelle, I just thought it'd be good. The notes that you put at the bottom of these things are very explanatory. I don't know whether the public can see that or what you might want to.
No, they can't.
Just read. Can you read those?
Sure. We're back at the general fund. If you want to stay on that page, or the budget expenditures are primary for completion of the admin building. The completion, like I just said, the primary school, everything is renovations are taken care of for this year. The fiscal year expected expenditures for the public radio system is.
Michelle, can we go back to the? I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's
Can we go back
okay.
to the notes for?
That's what I was going to do.
the first
but he was on
slide.
the first one. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're on page 2. I need to be
Underneath
on
the
page
general fund, page 5.
1. Okay.
Yeah, page 5 of the general funds.
So you do want me on page 5?
Please.
Okay. Not a problem. So we're on the total funds. The FY22 budget projects at the end of the fund balance and all the funded balance is $20 million. Actual year-to-date transactions show the fund balance at $25 million. I can probably read it better. I'm having a hard time reading on this.
This is back in the general fund.
So
I
you're
had to
back
read.
on 1.
Yeah. So
I'm
the
so
page 5
confused.
is up top. So the general fund on this note is basically you receive some ARPA funds of the $2 million that was budgeted, which we actually will receive 2.5. You have about almost 1.3 received. So this is still in the general fund. I'm sorry, I brought him back because page 5 is up the top is actually page 1 of 5.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it had the page numbers at the bottom, so I'm sorry. You told me you wanted it on page 5.
Yeah, I
so
apologize.
that's okay. So are we currently where we are?
Let's go to 2 of 5.
You want 2 of 5. This is just the capital budget. It might be better for the folks to see the numbers as opposed to read the words on. There you go. So they can see where we are with revenues and expenditures. And if you come down just a tad bit too, actually go up, I guess is what I need to tell you to do. Go up to the top of the page. There you go. So they can see going across there the budget, the year-to-date actuals, and the percentage. That's what I'm trying to show for the.
So we're all zero on those.
We're all on zeros,
So
yes.
go down to the capital project outlay at the expenditures that we're at 11.95%. And go from there, I guess, Michelle.
Okay. We have the remaining balance of 510,000 of the budget expenditures are set aside for the asset replacement and repairs for vehicles, facility repairs, and IT equipment and software.
So you basically have your 3 million budgeted for your capital. You're going to expend it, as you can see, 600 some thousand. So you have the bulk of your capital still remaining. Your primary school closeout's very close. As some of you are on the CIP committee with the school's supposed to receive their last invoice, which is going to leave bond proceeds about $621K for you to consider. So our projects overall, I want to say your numbers are good, but Brian has a radio project getting ready to kick off with a tower at Hoover Ridge, followed by a tower out at the Hughes River site out in Nethers. So while it looks good now, we will manage those projects, but that's why you're really favorable right now.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Michelle.
No, that's okay. We have the school funds. You want to go to page 4? There you go. School funds, that includes all the school operating funds, the school food service, school non-debt capital projects, textbooks, and the Armstrong Scholarship. So, right now, the revenues for them are at 39%, and they have not realized and gotten in all their funding. So that's the reason that one's a little bit skewed right now.
Yes.
And on page 5, for the all funds total, revenues were at 51%. You can see right there. And then expenditures were only at 46. So you go down just a tad bit right there. So overall, we are in fairly good shape for this year, for fiscal year 22.
It also kind of shows that permits and privilege fees and regulatory license, and we know the building department, the building and zoning has been fairly busy, and that has to reflect that specifically.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah.
So our personal property, out of our revenue sources for the county, I mean, they exceeded probably by about $300,000. We're ahead of what was budgeted. I think it was 3.2, so we're ahead by 300,000. The real estate, we're about 52%. So where you expect to be half year, we do real estate twice a year. As Michelle just pointed out, though, the school's a little bit low. It doesn't mean that they're not going to receive this. I know I spoke to Mr. Jewett about this earlier. The sales tax and some of those items just not have been, I'm going to say booked. Maybe they've received it. They just haven't booked it or sent that to finance, because there is a separation between their finance and our finance. But we are looking at that. Hopefully their basic school aid and sales tax come in. But on the county side, for your real estate and your personal property, you're on track, or if not, really doing very well. So overall, the takeaway is that you've expended less than what you have in revenues currently.
Absolutely. What else would you like to point out, Michelle?
That's pretty much it. Everything's in good shape right now.
All right. Bobby, do you have, I know you're watching, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I'll make a couple of points. I just want to reiterate, and if you go to the bottom of each page, you'll see a fund balance at the beginning of the year and then a fund balance projected at the end of this update. And basically, I guess the main thing to take away from this update is that currently we had budgeted to use about 4.7 million of fund balance. And a lot of that money was for capital. But overall, so far, we have actually added to fund balance. So what that means is a couple things. Some of it's a timing difference, meaning we probably are going to spend more money on our capital projects. And that number might change by the end of June. But also, I do think it shows that we probably under budgeted our revenues for the year, and we're probably going to end up exceeding a lot of those estimates on our revenue side. And on the expenditure side, I think it still shows that we're saving money compared to what we had budgeted for the entire year. So I think that you guys are in great shape. Cash flow is running just about the same as what you see for year-to-date net change and fund balance. So we're collecting as we spend. We're not dipping, and Stephanie, if she's still on the line, can chime in, but I don't think we're dipping into our cash. So overall, I think everything is great at this point. And like I said, I expect overall to come in a lot better than what we budgeted, which was a 4.7 million usage of fund balance. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions if you have any.
All right. Does anybody have any questions for Michelle or Bobby?
No, sir.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Bobby, thank you again.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You as well. All right. Lauren, tell us about the voting precincts.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
before you got here,
I've listened. We're
Oh,
gonna
you
have
heard
a,
it?
Have a mock public hearing.
Okay.
Listen, it sounds like a good
There you
plan.
go.
I'm with you. That's right on the money. Please, Lauren.
All right. Good evening. I'm here today on behalf of the Voter Registration Office and part of the Madison County Electoral Board to recommend the consolidation of two voting precincts. Graves Mill and Wolftown is what we would like to combine. A little background on it is the Graves Mill voting precinct has 88 registered voters. 2 of them are listed as inactive. In November's 2021 election, 58 people voted at Graves Mill and cast their ballot in person on election day, and 8 people voted early, either by mail or in my office here. Despite them having a smaller number of voters, the polling place itself still has minimum requirements that we have to meet, including the same voting equipment that's at every other polling place, a minimum of 3 officers of election, and all the supplies, election materials, and etc. Code of Virginia 24.2-307 states that a minimum of 100 voters is required to establish a precinct. It has nothing to do with already standing precinct, so it's not saying that we have to consolidate Graves Mill because of this. Our only point in stating that was if we were trying to create Graves Mill today, it wouldn't be possible to do it. However, nothing says that this has to be done. The Graves Mill polling place is located at the Graves Chapel. It's at 104 Bluff Mountain Road, and the Wolftown polling place is at Rapidan Baptist Church 150 Rapidan Church Lane. We mapped it out, and they're 6 miles apart and says that it's a 10-minute driving distance per MapQuest. The fiscal impact of consolidating these precincts would save the county $540 per election in officer of election fees and $150 per election in rental fees for the building, which would total $1,380 annually, because typically every year we do have a minimum of 2 elections. Due to the new requirements for early voting results, the registrar's office or the central absentee precinct does need a second machine. The cost of this machine is about $10,000 by the time you would have a scanner and everything that needs to go with it to get it started. And the consolidation of one precinct would allow us to basically recycle that equipment that's there and put it into our office. To clarify that a little bit, because I know Mr. Smith touched on it, we have a machine for every precinct right now, which is 9, and then 1 for the early voting precinct. And we also have 2 spares. The spares come into use if something happens on election day, like the machine's not reading, or they drop it setting it up that morning and shatter it, or something like that. There's always 2 spares. But last year, as of 2021, we had to start mandatory pre-processing. And because the parties want to know how their voters are voting and how the results are coming in, both by mail and in person, we have to tabulate those separate, which has never happened before until last November's election. Because of that, that's why we need 2 separate machines in the cap, and that was updated in code section 24.2-709.1. It speaks about how we have to hold mandatory pre-processing, and when we enter results, we only have the option now to put them in as by mail, early voting, and then there's also a post-election section because we can take them for 3 days afterwards. So that's just to clarify that a little bit. So we're not going to be out of machines, but by the absentee precinct having to use 2, it really only puts us down to 1 spare. So, you know, if Wolftown's machine breaks down and then 6 hours later, Brightwood's machine malfunctions, we're hand counting. And I know that that was brought up a couple times earlier, but if you cut on the news at all whatsoever, you know that elections are at the top of the news. You see everything about it when something goes wrong. Look at the presidential election in 2020, for example. It's all you heard about. I just don't think hand counting is something that we ever want to have to do or address, because look at your risk of error there. It's not something that I would want to put on the county. I wouldn't feel comfortable with, 3 or 4 election officials having to hand count ballots. And we may not ever need, which is why we kind of got this on the agenda so that we could go ahead and get it started. If it is something the Board of Supervisors wants to pursue, we would have to have everything done and moving forward by April 22nd. Just to summarize a little bit, you guys do also have 2 options. If it's something that you want to pursue, you can do kind of what we're doing now, where we have a public hearing for 30 days and public comment. And then there's an additional 30-day waiting period. And if you voted yes and decided to do this, then I would handle everything after that point. We would basically just have to remove the one line between Graves Mill and Wolftown and change Graves Mill voters to the Wolftown precinct. Your other option is you can also obtain a certification of no objection. That goes to the Office of the Attorney General, and just depending on how quick they get to that in the office and sign off on it or don't sign off on it, it would be approved or not approved, and you would not have to do any other type of process. Just to go back and summarize, some of our main points for doing this were the savings of the $540 in election official fees, the $150 in the facility rentals, savings of about $10,000 for the new voting equipment if we don't consolidate, because we'll need extra equipment at that point. Reallocation of other election materials such as spare equipment like our poll pads that we have. We don't have any of those spares, so that would give us 2 in case of other malfunctions. The reduced number of election officials, or being able to use them in other places that they might be more needed. And another strong point is that there's no cell phone service at Graves Mill and no landline. So we borrow a radio from the sheriff's office, and that's our only means of communication with them on election day. So if their equipment malfunctions or they run out of ballots or, something serious happens, the radio is the only method that we have, but it's not always great. Sometimes it's hard to communicate or get clear messages. I know that Graves Mill means a lot to a lot of people, and it's such a nice precinct, such a nice area. I totally understand, but I do think that it's my job to come to you guys with what I think is best for our office. And in my opinion, I think that this is something the county should pursue, especially now as we're in the process of redistricting, because it's the best time to do it. You guys could look into redrawing lines like Mr. Lewis noted earlier. That's definitely something that we'd want to do right now, but the consolidation of this one, Graves Mill has 88 registered voters. Our next smallest precinct is Etland. They have 542. So that's just to give you a little insight there of going from the smallest to the next smallest. You're talking 400 and some people. It's not even close to anything else that we have. Not to mean that these people aren't important. Every vote's important and every vote counts, and that's my job, to make sure of that. But we do also have 45 days of no excuse early voting in our office, where 30% of the county consistently votes early in person. And we also have by mail voting. So if someone, doesn't want to travel out of Graves Mill, they do have the option for me to mail it to them. That's always been an option. But 30% of the county is voting with me before election day even comes. So I think those numbers, are pretty big themselves. Mr. Graves was right. Graves Mill always has the highest voter turnout. They've got 75% for last November, and the next closest one was Etland, who had 71%. So they do always have great turnout. That's never been in question. It's just the same things required for a much smaller amount of people, and I think those sources could be better utilized elsewhere.
Traditionally, on items similar to this, we get like an official letter from in this case, it would be the electoral board.
Yes.
Is there plans to get us one of these letters?
So the electoral board met last week, and I had 2 who voted yes to pursue this and 1 who did not vote because the 2 yeses already kind of.
There's 3 people on the electoral board. That's
yeah.
all that's on there.
That's it. Yes, sir.
Well, there you go. Oh.
So they're on board. I'm happy to have them write something and sign it. If you guys want that, we've got a board meeting coming up again next week, so we can take care of that.
Anybody have questions for Lauren before we open it up to the mock? Yeah, please.
Excuse me. It was at least based on a vote. She certainly can bring a recommendation letter if so you wish that we recall that vote. The other option, I think she may have touched on it, just to reemphasize, the other route, if it wanted to be considered, I'm not weighing one way or the other, but would be to obtain a certificate of no objection from the Office of Civil Rights within the Office of the Attorney General.
Mm-hmm.
So when we first discussed this, I had suggested bring it to this body because your voters are closest to you versus an Attorney General. So just for clarity purposes.
All right.
And the certification of no objection is kind of a quicker route typically, since this is a minimum of 60 days because we've got 30 days of public comment and then a 30-day wait period. So that's more of the reason of using that one. But we have time for either if it's something you want to pursue.
So Lauren, who started this process, or the electoral board was looking at this, or is this where it came from?
Yeah, so the redistricting is going on right now, and Madison wasn't affected with anything other than our district number, really. So it's not any lines or anything that has to be redone. Again, Mr. Lewis did note on that about how some of the lines could probably be redrawn better, but I think that's something the Board of Supervisors is responsible for if you want to make any changes to that. If you don't, we still, because of the district changes, have to mail out new voter letters to every registered voter and things like that, which is why I was trying to handle it now before we send them a letter for the redistrict and then send them a new one if we consolidate precincts, just to not cause confusion.
Well, I've talked to a fair amount of residents from Graves
Mhm.
Mill, and everyone I talked to is opposed to closing that precinct.
Yes.
Not only because it's, it's historical, but
Sure.
because they do have a high voter percentage,
Mhm.
and $1,300 is not so much to spend
Right.
on an
correct.
election. Now, I
Yeah.
know if you have to buy your voting machine, that's another story.
Right. Yeah.
And, Republicans are constantly accused of trying to make it hard for people to vote. And I don't care whether you're a Republican or Democrat, I don't want to make it hard for people to vote.
Sure.
So, my thinking is, I think we ought to leave it as it is.
Okay. Yeah, that's completely understandable. I think some of our reasoning was just the short distance. You're only talking 6 miles of travel time. 45 days of no excuse voting hasn't been around at all until November of 2020. So, reasonably, if you're coming out to Food Line to get groceries, you could swing in, cast your vote, and be done and not have to worry about Election Day if that's something that you wanted to do. We know that people like it because truly 30%. Virginia was given a projection when early voting started of what we were expected to see in 3 years, and we smashed through it the first year and have been consistent at 30%, which is what we're supposed to reach by year 3. So Madison definitely comes out early, participates, shows up for it. But I understand either way, however you guys.
I don't think that they mind traveling.
Right,
I
sure.
don't, because it's, Madison's not that big of a county in
Right.
the first place. I think it's just the principle of keeping it where it is.
Okay.
Questions, comments, gentlemen?
Do you foresee the early voting staying?
Yeah. Yeah,
I
I think early voting is definitely here to stay. When Virginia brought it in 2020, they went from having no early voting to early voting for the longest in the country. 45 days is the longest that it's offered anywhere. We've seen, like I said, great turnouts. There are bills and whatnot where they've talked about reducing it from 45 days. I don't necessarily see them going through, but if they could, it's still always going to be here, just maybe not for 45 days.
And forgive me, we can't have one machine in there. I don't know. I'm asking.
In the early voting site. So the reason that we have to have 2 now is that the results have to be reported separately for the people who vote by mail and the people who vote in person.
Okay.
Previously, we always used the same machine until this past November, and they changed the ruling because they want results separately for how the by mail voters are voting and how the in-person voters are voting, and that's the only reason that we need 2 machines.
Okay. I like Charlotte. I've heard from Graves Mill quite a bit,
Mhm.
and I definitely want to preserve the history. So,
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Jewett?
Well, I agree. If we're worried about election accessibility and election integrity, I think that the logical course of action is to retain the precinct, but purchase any additional voting machines that we need to have. We have to spend $10,000 to do that. I guess that's actually a small price to pay for election integrity. That's my opinion.
Mr. Yell? Yeah, let's see. I don't mean to put a target on anybody's back, but who's on the electoral board? So if they're here, if any of them are here, I'd like to. All right.
So
That's
this is-
3 people on the electoral board?
It is. The
Yep.
secretary is sick, so she was unable to make it. But this is Annette Hyde and Larry Thomas, who are both new members.
So the secretary is not a member.
She is, yeah.
There are 3 voting members or
Mhm.
4 voting members?
3.
Who's the secretary?
Margaret Douglas.
Okay.
So it's Larry, Annette, and who's the 3rd voting
Margaret
member?
Douglas.
Margaret Douglas.
Mhm.
And who we've got 2 out of the 3 tonight. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, hang on. I go backwards here. So Mr. Smith brought up the redundancy issue. Are you saying that redundancy is a nice to have, or is it a state requirement?
When you say redundancy, you mean like,
I guess having the backup machines at all.
so
Do you need the $10,000 machine you're talking about?
Mhm.
That would go to Graves Mill, right?
the machine, Grace Mill already has their own machine. So I need a second one for the absentee precinct or to use as a spare. We've kind of taken the spare and are using it as our second in the absentee precinct.
Okay.
And we really just need to replace that in case 2 machines were to go down on election
So the
day.
$10,000 machine
Mhm.
has nothing to do with Graves Mill?
Other than if Graves Mill were to consolidate, that machine could be recycled and become that machine that we ultimately will have to buy.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Okay.
It seems like we've all gotten used to the current machines that we have now. When do they plan on changing those and making them not work anymore?
We just did an upgrade to Windows 10 and should be good.
All right,
yeah.
so we got at least
He was
another
just
year.
here like 2 weeks ago, upgraded everything to Windows 10. We're
All right,
meeting all regulations and good to go.
good. So we got one more year.
I got
And they're
one
paid
more
for.
question you.
So
So, Lauren, with all due respect, I don't think you answered Charlotte's question about who started this. I mean, who started this thing as, oh, maybe we should do this? Is that you when you were filling out your budget, or who started it?
I asked for consolidation money from you all last year in our budget because the redistricting should have been further along by now, but the census numbers came in late and kind of pushed everything back. So we couldn't make any precinct consolidations or changes before getting the census information. And now we have that and the redistricting's begun. So I was trying to get it all done at one time if this was something we wanted to pursue.
Okay.
And it has been talked about in the past. I know of 2 times that it's come up to prior boards and wasn't pursued. So definitely just, really the only reason is the lack of voters there. Not that they don't turn out and that participation isn't great, but it's only 88 people and it's so much smaller than everything else that we have.
That's all I got.
Yes, sir. All right, let's open it up to the mock public hearing, I guess. Who would like to say something about this? And if we can hand the mic around, Pete, please. Pete, you mind going second? Mr. Lillard, go real quick. Thank you. Mr. Lillard.
Randall Lillard, Graves Mill. I've been there ever since I was in the first grade, except my military time. And I was election official for a number of years. And we've always had the best percentage of registered voters voting. And one year we had 100%. And our numbers weren't as high then as they are now, but we're growing. Needless to say, I'm in favor of keeping our voting precinct.
Thank you, Mr. Lillard.
Pete?
I want to say, I don't live in Graves Mill, but I have a lot of property in Graves Mill. And, it's great for what the guys that live in that area have done, just to put the old post office back, fix up some of the history there. And in our comp plan, it says we want to protect our historic. And I think that just, I think that going away with this is just so unethical because of the history that's behind this place. No reason we should get rid of this place. And if it's an issue of the $1,300, I'll donate it.
Thank you, Pete. Who would like to go next? Yes, ma'am.
I have extended remarks.
All right.
I hate to do this, I really do. My name is Larry Thomas. I was recently appointed to the Electoral Board.
The first time I saw this proposal was less than a month after I was sworn in at the first electoral board meeting. That meeting took place last Thursday, January 19th, less than a week ago. I was afforded no time to investigate the ramifications of it, much less give it basic deliberation, and I was asked to support it because it was urgent. The reasons were: 1, the registrar needs an extra machine for the central absentee precinct app in the registrar's office that receives early and absentee voting, some of which was mitigation for COVID restrictions. 2nd, the registrar may need an extra machine because the town of Madison may have to be established as its own precinct. That, she said, would need to apply for a waiver. Those were the issues that were presented to me. The solution for these problems was to merge the Wolftown and Graves Mill precincts and take the Graves Mill machine. The registrar's reason for pushing this kill two birds with one stone was to get this on the Board of Supervisors meeting agenda, tonight's agenda. The proposal explains it would be more efficient to notify Graves Mill residents of the merging of their precinct with Wolftown in the same meeting containing new registration cards, in the same mailing containing new registration cards having to do with state redistricting. The assessment of the postage costs to notify 88 registered voters in Graves Mill in a separate letter mailing was told to me is going to be $5,000. Her estimated cost of a new machine at the time of her presentation to the electoral board was $15,000. The bargain price is now $10,000. Given only 4 business days, counting today before this meeting, I could not support this proposal without more information. 1, COVID lockdowns are the exception, not the rule, and the inflated absentee ballot numbers are as well. The existing machine in the registrar's office filled the needs of the last election. 2 days after our vote, and she has clarified this evening that she needs 2 machines because she has to do separate counts. I'm wondering if you could possibly do the early voting counts first and then count the absentee ballots afterwards, but we'll go there later. 2 days after our vote on Friday, January 21st, the registrar notified me that a machine in the town wouldn't be needed for 2 years. At that time, she requested clarification about the need to create a town district from the Virginia Department of Elections. The response, which referenced the Office of the Attorney General, was that there's no need to create a town precinct or apply for a waiver. These were the reasons that were presented to me when I was asked for a vote. Okay. So here we are at square one with a howitzer aimed at a button buck for his rack, and we're not even hungry. Absent the need of the town precinct, we are reduced to a convoluted, complicated, and controversial proposal to kill a precinct for their voting machine and ostensibly save money so we can have redundancy for a need that might disappear in the near future. Granted, it wouldn't hurt to have an additional machine, but to impulsively, wantonly harvest a precinct that is iconic in the Commonwealth, is of significant cultural, historic, symbolic value, seems taking it a bit over the bag limit. In the interest of efficiency and expediency, I would propose serious advanced research, taking direct aim, and submitting a budget request for another machine. That's my public comment. This will take a little bit longer, but it's worth it.
Read quickly.
If you have the time, I
Yes,
appreciate your
ma'am.
patience. Embedded in this proposal is another agenda to eliminate the Graves Mill precinct due to its small size. I could address the prospects of the Graves Mill community growing, having more registered voters. They have and they will. They have grown and they will. Or I could address whether or not more voting machines are needed here or there and the strategic necessities of voter access. These are things that are easily resolved without altering the map, a disruption that even legislators do only every decade. But I'm moved to address something equally important. It's about priorities, timelines, respect for our citizenry, and foresight. It's about who we are and what we need. I've lived in Madison for over 42 years. I have to count because I came here. I've seen this before. I've formally researched and written about the heritage and culture of this community. I'm familiar with the history of eliminating Graves Mill Precinct, and I know many of the voters in that precinct. If I think this proposal this time is rushed, I can only imagine what they think. Among the principles that the country was founded on is the idea that decisions should be made seriously. It should be seriously considered. Details should be addressed and changes should be slow. Making too many changes too quickly has been compared to radically shifting the rudder of a ship, creating conditions where the ship might capsize. On the national and state level, too many legislators, so-called, seem to have forgotten that principle. Just in the past year, nearly every aspect of our daily lives has been radically altered in the name of another emergency or shifting ideologies. Institutions the majority of our citizenry have historically trusted are ridiculed daily due to persistent efforts to pursue one agenda or another as opposed to serving the people. The integrity of the entire system by which we make our most valuable decisions and protect our right to entertain options and change, the electoral system, has been called into question. Because of redistricting, we've lost our congressman, our state senator, and our delegate. Due to changes in our calendar, we have to scurry to locate and elect new ones. We've even recently been subjected to historically stressful weather conditions. At some point, we must put the brakes on the chaos, and I believe this is one of those points. I'm one of the handful of people charged with the responsibility for election integrity, perhaps even restoring faith in that system. There may be legitimate reasons for this goal, but the means of reaching it are in question. Bringing this change to the floor at this time without more deliberation is premature and can only serve to disrupt and potentially alienate a special pocket of dedicated voters who take pride in the system. The story of Graves Mill Precinct is unfortunately an anomaly. That means it's out of the ordinary for those who need a dictionary. Their voter precipitation in the election was 75% in 2021, counting absentee ballots. In all the time I've been here, this pocket of residents has taken extreme pride in their precinct as a feature of their hamlet's culture and a symbol of their freedom. It's part of the fabric of this county that represents the commitment, community, and its roots reach back to the foundations of our country. It is not a mere matter of cost, redistricting, expediency, or efficiency. It's a precious remnant of what we used to call American. It's something that you can't buy. I don't care how much revenue you raise. You can't regulate it, no matter how many pages of red tape you generate. It's a phenomenon to be protected, held up as an example, cherished and preserved. It's a symbol of resolve that longtime Madisonian families look to as a reminder that we are a free and resilient people. It's a target for those who would dissolve our past in the name of modernity. They're drawn to it. It's a part of our history that the government is charged with protecting, whether or not it's included in the National Register of Historic Places. You can preserve the tangible place, but it takes forethought, insight, respect, and rigorous determination to preserve standards of character and virtue like those embodied in Graves Mill. Now is not the time to give proposals like this passing consideration for the sake of expediency or efficiency. I'm asking you to reject it because it lacks fundamental rational support. If you want to revisit it, save it for when the seas are calmer and you can give it adequate deliberation. Now is the time to reach out to dedicated citizens and encourage them proudly to cultivate that record of participation, that record participation rate. I'm sorry, my eyes are blurry, I can't see. Not dismantle one element of stability in their lives. If the issue as it has been in the past, really is that Graves Mill has too few voters to justify its existence. There are other ways to address it. Most of all, Graves Mill residents should be included in the preliminary discussion. Clearly, this should have happened before this proposal was submitted. Given the size of Graves Mill Precinct has been a subject of historic discussion, questioning, but burying the plan to eliminate the precinct more than one reason is deceptive on its face. The entire Graves Mill challenge could be met by considering other options. There are voters in Fletcher, for example, who have to travel to Wolftown and then back to Graves Mill to vote because they used to travel a road that goes up to the bluff and down Kinsey Run. The road to the bluff from Fletcher still exists, but I don't think any of them want to travel it. I propose that those voters be included in the Wolftown precinct to save travel time for them. It's just a handful of people. In addition, perhaps in order to preserve the Graves Mill precinct, adding more of the Wolftown territory, say by including those north of the Rapidan and residing along the Graves Mill Road and its tributaries, which is adjacent to Graves Mill, and a simpler trip to Graves Mill precinct. Who was it? David Lewis said he used to live at Graves Mill Farm, which is about halfway between Graves Mill and the Rapidan River. He said it was easier to go to Graves Mill, but he was in Wolftown. He had to go to Wolftown. I realize that this complicates the alteration a bit, but it preserves the integrity of Graves Mill. This proposal, albeit more difficult to accomplish but simpler for those who live in the region, simply demonstrates that sufficient attention was not given to this issue in the time allowed, and there's more than one way to approach a perceived problem. Thank you for attention. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for putting up with my crappy reading.
Thank you, Larry. Other comments? Yes, sir.
My name is Mitch Bernstein. I'm a resident of Graves Mill. And I'm sorry I missed some of the friends and neighbors' earlier public comments. I didn't realize you would be in. So I hope I'm not being repetitive. But I think what I want, I've been here for 35 years, which makes me a newcomer in Graves Mill terms, and certainly Madison County. I look at my friends, the Willards, who have had a centennial farm. This was probably 20 years ago. But I think what I'd like to do is just to share with the board what it means to be a Graves Mill resident today. You know, because we've heard about it's a historical resource, we've heard about its cultural significance, and these things are all true. But what makes it a special place is that it actually has a sense of community. And we come together. Doug Graves maintains a listserv where we have, you know, local news is shared with everybody. There's a Christmas party, a holiday party every year. If COVID notwithstanding, we've been meeting there since I can remember, as long as I can remember. And Graves Mill itself is resilient. When we moved here, there was not only the church that was there, there was a thrift store, there was a separate post office building, there were separate schoolhouses that were there that from the 1800s, all preserved. They were all wiped out by the flood. That was like 9 years after we came. And yet everybody came back together, and the church, the center, was still, you know, the cultural center of our community. The holiday parties, as I said. We'd gather there for the roadside cleanups that we would get together to do. We would have other, Doug put together, Mr. Graves, a fantastic historical exhibit about 4 or 5 years ago about the history of Graves Mill, and everybody felt a part of that. And then what happened, the post office was relocated in the church to maintain that continuity. I think you're probably familiar with the fact that the Postal Service discontinued, basically closed the Graves Mill separate post office back in, I don't remember the year. And we tried to stop it. We tried to appeal. Turned out we were out of time. We came too late, the Postal Service. Nevertheless, that community remains centered in that place. Now, to take away our
electoral, not rights, I understand, but our sense of presence there, being able to walk in some of our cases down to the polling place means a lot. It makes a big difference in the way that sense of community thrives. And I fear that if this proposal goes through, because a machine might be used as a spare in case it's needed somewhere else, it would really strike a blow into the heart of our community for no good reason. We've talked about, other people have talked about the finances and how it would work. And, well, it's lost in the rounding, the amount of money that this would cost every year to do this. As for the machine, I understand and I appreciate Member Jewett's statement that if you need a new machine, but invest in a new machine. But I have another proposal too. If it should turn out that you need that other machine somewhere else, and I know Lauren was talking about hand counting being brutal process. Not so hard to count 88 ballots. So you could have hand counting there if you needed a machine somewhere else. But you can maintain the fact that we have a community and we have our own electoral district. And that's about all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Other comments? Other comments? Other comments? Yes, ma'am.
I'll be really quick, I promise. I just want to say that Graves Mill has always been a great precinct for us. Scooty's family supplies all the election officials. It's a beautiful church. They do a great job. I just wanted to come up and clarify a few things that Ms. Thomas said, because it sounds like I'm a pretty big villain. $5,000 is not what I said it was going to cost to send out new voter cards. That's the cost for the whole county. So you're talking 10,000 registered voters. Graves Mill's cost in sending out new voter cards to 88 people is super minimal and not anything that would matter. I was just trying to cut down on confusion from sending a current card and then, a month later we consolidate and sending another one. Another clarification there is she made the comment that she was just introduced to this, but that's only because new electoral board members just started January 1st. So last week was our first board meeting, but this is something that we spent a lot of time on with the prior board. If Miss Douglas was here, she could attest to that. But I've spent a lot of time on it. My staff has spent a lot of time on it. We don't take changes like this lightly, and I take my job very seriously. So it definitely had a lot of thought, a lot of concentration. Financially, looking at it, of course, this makes the most sense when you're talking about a small number of voters and the cost of new equipment and things like that. I understand how important it is to Madison County and to the voters, and I completely respect that and respect everything that they're saying. And, but I was just trying to make a point of what we thought was best for the office and for the amount of work that we have to put in and things like that. And when we talk about it growing, it's still important to remember that the next smallest precinct is 454 voters larger than this one. So, like I said, I get all that. Everybody makes great valid points, and I'm completely on board with whatever you guys decide. It's just my job to bring it to you and present the facts. But that's the reason that it was only brought up a week ago, and we've moved forward. And the date that I gave you earlier of the April 22nd, I believe, that's my last day to make this happen before a June primary, because I can't make any changes within 60 days. So it almost had to be on today's agenda, because if I waited 2 more weeks, then that's putting us on a very fine line if anything were to come up or you guys were, to decide to go forward with it. So that's the reason that we brought it to you today.
Thank you. Other public comment? Other public comment. Livingston, are they rolling in on the computer? That's a real bummer. All right. How you all want to proceed here? It doesn't look so good for getting rid of the Graves Mill polling place. It seems very unanimous that the citizens of Graves Mill want to leave it alone. Y'all want to pursue this any farther, or do you just want to leave it the way it is?
Yeah, I think I too have a sentimental attachment to Graves Mill. I spent a lot of time up there at General Jenkins's house when I was growing up. His mother babysitting us, so I do understand Mr. Bernstein's comments about the community, and we've lost too many of them. So I say we keep it. I'll go with keeping it.
All right.
But for the love of God, will somebody be here during budget season and watch us put the 10 grand on the budget page?
No, that's what it looks like. You've got to add to your request that you submitted last week.
Mr. Chairman, I have a few comments.
Please, Bowman.
I agree that the precinct needs to remain open for different reasons, but I'd also like to commend Mrs. Eanes for her good faith discharge of her duties as registrar by bringing us up for discussion. And I hope that the registrar and the electoral board will see fit to work together this quarter to make sure that they can come up with plans and whatnot to make sure that we have, or ensure that we have election integrity in Madison County. And again, if that requires additional expenditures, I certainly support that. But thank you, Ms. Eanes.
Anybody else? All right, looks like that one's done. Thank you, Lauren, and everybody that commented. Going to 7A, the letter of support for Skyline Cap. Understand Mr. Yao is going to recuse himself from voting on this.
So
and
is Jim.
And Mr. Jewett. Mr. Yao, would you like to explain this to us?
Yeah,
What you're requesting?
Let me explain. So I am the finance director for Skyline Community Action Partnership. Barbara's house that is behind our office at the south end of town has been vacant for a couple of years. They were used, Mesa owns it currently. They were using it for transitional housing. We got word from Patrick Mauney, which many of you already know from the Rappahannock-Rapidan Regional Commission. They have got $2 or $3 million in grants that they could put out. So Skyline Cap is applying for a grant to get, we would get about 90% of the money to buy those 5 units behind us up there and take them from transitional housing to income, 80% or below of AMI, annual median income. So it would be affordable housing, and they are apartments. There's 5 apartments in there. There's 2 3-bedrooms and 3 2-bedrooms. So anyhow, it said right in the grant application that a letter of support from your local government would be a nice thing for us to throw in there, and it's due. We got to turn it in. We're going to turn it in tomorrow. It's due Thursday. So I approached all of the guys, members of the board individually, Chuck, to see if y'all would agree to this. So that's what this is about. But I'm going to recuse myself, and Jim is on the board at Skyline Cap. So
You have comments on this, Mr. Jewett?
No.
All right. Jonathan, anything?
No, I mean, we've been tracking this. I think since my first meeting on the regional commission, they spoke about monies available, and I applaud Skyline Cap. I don't know if there were many in line right behind them. They jumped at the opportunity. Being a former Skyline Cap board member, housing's what they do, and they do it very well. So it's good that there's another opportunity. A lot of these opportunities fall in Greene County. It's good that this opportunity has come about in Madison County.
It seems like an opportunity for our community and something that's needed, and especially if it's been vacant, which I certainly
Couple
didn't
years.
realize for a couple of years. There's no reason not to go down this path. Anybody else have any comments on this? What would the board like to do? And understand Mr. Jewett and Mr. Yao are going to recuse themselves from this.
So do you need a motion
Yes.
just to approve the grant application,
Letter of support.
letter of support. So moved.
Second.
All right, motion made and seconded. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed and recused.
I recuse myself.
I recuse myself.
Mr. Barry, you got it? We'll sign it this evening and get it taken care of. Absolutely. Any other new business? Information and correspondence? Mr. Weekly, anything?
So, no, sir, just under discussion.
All right,
items
let's
when
go
you're
to
ready.
discussion. Ordinance review.
So the ordinance review, as you may recall, Mr. Chairman, it came about in our one of our last planning commission workshops. There's an ordinance on 4 lots on one driveway, and I believe, Mr. Chairman, the way it works, that the board would like to first discuss and have the planning commission take up anything for review. You actually give them a request, a direction to do so. So that's what the agenda item was about, the 4 lots on one driveway. I could have, if you like, while you discuss it, Mr. Barry pull up the ordinance citation so you can see it. That's in Unicode.
This has been a continual issue with the planning commission and the board for years now. We've been talking about it. The rule right now is that per access, 4 lots are available, or 4 lots are accessible per entrance off of a road. It would seem it's kind of goes both ways. I can understand why it has been put in place on the basis of trying to continue the rural essence of Madison and way of life and everything that we all enjoy so much. Also, by having only 4, in some cases, is actually adds entrances to public roads and seems counterintuitive. I kind of think it would be a good direction if we had the planning commission review it and make a recommendation to us on something that is continually coming up in front of the board and the planning commission, and kind of maybe catch up to where we're at today instead of where we were yesterday. Mr. Yao, you've been involved in this pretty actively as well.
Right. So, there are a number of options, which I think most of the planning commission members already are aware of, that, if you go more than 4, or say maybe you go more than 6 or whatever it is, you might require a road maintenance agreement among the ones. But the issue comes up when, somebody, like Doug Graves might own this piece of property way up here, and then the Mitch Burdensteins of the world come in and buy these up right here, and then next thing you know, there's 4, and you can't get to your property. That's been an issue. That goes back to the grandfathering thing that we got our lecture on last time.
And
Thank you.
the other one that just seems incredible about this is that there are lots of roads, and I can think of 2 at least over the last year that we've discussed, that have more than 4 lot accesses per easement or access point that have been in existence for a long period of time. It just seems like we just need to do something on this. And getting the planning commission to review it is a good start to the new year, I really think. Other comments on this? Y'all want to kind of make a motion so we can advise the planning commission to maybe look into this and come back to us with a plan? Does that sound reasonable or not? I do think we should probably do it with a motion, though, since it is advisement.
All right, and Mr. Chairman, I move that we ask the planning commission to look into the ordinance that currently reads 4 houses on a private drive. Oh, it is? Look at 4-8-1.
Second.
All right, motion made and seconded. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Mr. Weekly, I assume we'll send a letter to the chairman, and Pete's here. I'm sure he'll convey the message the right way for us, and we appreciate it. Mr. Weekly, the IDA advertising for it with Mr. Graves coming off.
Yes, sir. So, excuse me, cut my mic on. So Mr. Graves sent us a resignation letter. It's in the packet that has created an opening in the IDA. His term was set to expire on April 11th, 25. So therefore, as you've traditionally done, you've advertised, but certainly we're just looking for direction to do so. And normally what we would do, we receive applicants, we would bring them to you for an interview process and you make your selection. So we're just basically an update, asking for direction from you all. We would advertise right away if you so choose.
All right. Would everybody like to advertise for this?
Yeah.
Let's advertise.
Okay.
There you go.
And if you want any breakdown, Sean, I was trying to pull this up in this code section of the IDA purpose, but I know they deal with bonding and so forth for someone in the county. So I don't know if maybe a brief summary for our new members, but
That's basically the purpose of interviews for in other jurisdictions that have no active voters. So Madison County is additionally
yes, sir.
Also, APHID grants for Revelations that is coming out. I think that goes through the IDA. Also,
Yes.
Plow and Hearth in the past. Just a good conduit. We do have a head nod. I don't think we need a motion for this.
No.
Let's advertise and move on.
All right.
I need to ask
Please.
Sean.
Yep.
So Sean, do you had a chance to look into whether one can serve on two different boards? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Let's get Sean to get an answer for it, but let's go ahead and advertise.
Okay. Okay. Yes, sir.
All right, let's move to the next one. Advertise to the CSB.
So, and I just shortened the acronym. I apologize. It's the Rappahannock Rapidan Community Services Board. Misha Jones had resigned. This we made you aware of a prior meeting. Forgive me not recalling what that meeting was. You authorized us to advertise. We have done so. We have not received any candidates. So the question is, would you wish for us to re-advertise? Mr. Supervisor Dawson is your current board member. I'm not sure if you can have to. I can check on that. But I'm looking for direction if you want us to go back out and re-advertise. Or I know in the past, sometimes board members would phone a friend to stir up attention. But we just need a direction. We can certainly go out and re-advertise. But I'd like to know what you would like for me to do.
You have some friends you can call, maybe. Well, there you go. I was hoping you had more than me.
I was giving the benefit of the doubt, see. But,
At this, I mean, you've done what, one meeting so far? Two. There you go. Yeah, there you go. Let's continue advertising, and also we all should make some phone calls and talk to our friends. See how that goes.
All right.
Does that work?
yes, sir.
I mean, I don't see any other option here.
Yeah.
Tell your friends. We need somebody for the CSB. It's important, and you smell. All right. Anything else on that? All right. Public comment. Public comment. Public comment. All right. We do have closed session this evening. Thank you all very, very much. Sorry.
All right, I move that the board convene in a closed session pursuant to Virginia Code Sections 2.2-3711A1 for discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, discipline, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of any public body, and 2.2-3711A3 for the disposition of publicly held real property.
Motion's made and seconded. Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank y'all.
Oops. Party motion. Second by Charlotte.
This conference is no longer being recorded.
Mm-hmm.